to Study with Sudhir, your digital classroom. I'm TS Sudhir. We are going to be now taking a look at a poem called A Photograph written by Shirely Toulson, and this is part of the Hornbill textbook in English for class 11, the CBSE board. Okay, so we'll do a line by line, word by word explanation of this particular poem. इसका हिंदी में भी थोड़ा सा अनुवाद करने की कोशिश करेंगे उन विद्यार्थियों के लिए जो कि अंग्रेजी में समझने में उनको थोड़ा कष्ट होता है, बट लार्जली इट विल बी एन इंग्लिश टू हिंदी ट्रांसलेशन. And my suggestion to all students would be to understand it as much as possible in English, because that will only help you while you're writing your answers in the examination. Now, this particular poem is basically, if you have to do a summary first before we get into the line by line explanation, it's about the speaker, the poet's discovery of a photograph that shows her mother with her younger cousins when she was a 12-year-old girl, and the photograph has been shot at a beach. So there is a sense of nostalgia about a time gone by in that particular photograph, and the photograph shows her holding the hands of her two younger girl cousins as they had gone for paddling. Paddling is basically a way of navigating through the water, used largely for the way the ducks move in water. So that's what they were doing at the beach. Now the poem speaks about the photograph, the kind of pose that they were striking while they were smiling, looking at the camera, at the uncle who had clicked that photograph. Now the poet then goes on to talk about how her mother would look at that photograph some 20 or 30 years later and feel very happy. Also laugh looking at Betty and Dolly, her two cousins, and how they had been dressed in order to go to that particular beach when that photograph had been taken. Now the poet talks in a rather wistful, एक तरह से emotional manner में उस समय की को याद करते हुए she feels a little emotional, a little sense of sadness and remorse that the sea holiday at that particular beach was her mother's past. जब वो पोएट उस फोटोग्राफ को देखती हैं, उनको ये याद आता है कि ये जो फोटोग्राफ तस्वीर ली गई थी is part of her mother's past, right? The poet's past was her mother's laughter every time she looked at that photograph. So we are talking about two pasts here. The mother, when she looked at that photograph, she would remember all the laughter and the good memories that were associated while that photograph was clicked at that particular moment at the beach, right? Then there is a second kind of memory that we are talking about. Every time the poet would look at the photograph, she would remember her mother and how her mother would laugh every time she would look, she would react looking at that particular photograph, accompanied by a wry. Wry essentially means a bit of a disappointed, scoffing kind of a smile. Okay. Now the poet's mother has been dead for 12 years is what we learned from this particular poem. Now let's go through the poem and just explain the poem now that you have understood what is the basic summary of the poem. ये कविता में basic सारांश क्या है उसको मैंने आपको समझा दिया है. अब इस कविता को लाइन बाय लाइन देखते हैं. The cardboard shows me how it was when the two girl cousins went paddling. So जो कार्डबोर्ड में जो फोटोग्राफ रखी गई है उससे पता चलता है कि वो समय कैसा था जब ये सारे जो कजिन्स थे पैडलिंग के लिए समुद्र पे गए थे. Each one holding one of my mother's hands. The two girl cousins holding her mother's hand, that is the poet's mother's hands. And she, the big girl, some 12 years or so, or the mother was the eldest of the three and she was 12 years old. All three stood still, the way photograph लेते वक्त किस तरह से हम खड़े होते हैं ताकि एक perfect pose बन सके. So all three of them stood still at the beach, still to smile through their hair. So whenever, since the beach is an open area, the hair is generally flying around. At the uncle with the camera. A sweet face, the mother's, that was before I was born. Obviously she's only 12 years old. So the mother, so it was a sweet smile that they were kind of flashing for the camera, especially the mother. And the sea, which appears to have changed less, was their terribly transient feet. And the sea, अब ये समुद्र जो है बदलता नहीं है. All of us change, we age and we grow older with time and our looks and appearance changes. But not the sea. The sea remains the same through generations. That does not change at all. और इसके बारे में जो terribly transient feat के बारे में है उसके बारे में हम critical appreciation के time पे we will go about it in detail. Some 20-30 years later she would laugh at the snapshot, that photograph which was taken. So her mother would laugh every time she would see it. Some 20-30 years, every time she would see that photograph she would burst out in laughter. See Betty and Dolly, she would say, and look how they dressed us for the beach. Now this is an interesting poem because इसमें एक तरह से the dialogues have also been woven into the poem. So it's a different kind of a technique that Shirely Toulson has used in this particular poem, where she's quoting what her mother would say every time she would look at that particular photograph. And see how they dressed us for the beach. How they as in the parents had dressed these three children for the beach. The sea holiday was her past. The holiday, the day that she had spent at the beach, at the sea, was her mother's past. Mine is her laughter. What I remember of this past is the laughter which she kind of exuded, which she burst into every time she would see that photograph. Both right, that is disappointed with the labored ease of loss. There was a sense of loss as far as her mother was concerned, because this was part of her childhood, which was no longer part of her present. For the poet, this is part of her past, the past of her mother laughing every time she would look at her photo, at that particular seaside photograph. So both of them are conveying a sense of loss. Okay, labored ease of loss we will study in detail in the critical appreciation. Now she has been dead nearly as many years. That is, we are roughly being told that she has been dead for at least 12 years as that girl lived. Okay, referring to her mother's age at that point in time when the photograph was taken. And of this circumstance, there is nothing to say at all. That, there is really nothing to say about this whole passage of time and the memories that are associated with different times in your life. It's silences. Okay, the silence that is there is itself a kind of an end in itself. Okay, about this also we will read in detail. Now, one of the themes of this particular poem is that of time. The time is a theme in this particular poem. The poet is talking wistfully with a touch of nostalgia, as I mentioned, in the present, while the photograph has recorded a time in the distant past when the mother was 12 years old. The speaker is talking about a time in the more recent past. You understand that there are two times being referred to. The mother, whenever she would look at that photograph, the photograph is talking about a time in the distant past. But the poet is talking about a time a little more than 12 years old at least, but 20 to 30 years later, after that photograph was taken, about the mother's reaction to that photograph. So there are two different timings that we are talking about. So the poem is therefore both a comment on the passage of time and also the sense of loss, because the time has passed. Okay, what are the losses that we are talking about in this particular poem? The mother's loss of her youth when she was 12 years old, okay, and the speaker's loss of her mother. Both are talking about, there is a sense of loss at both levels. The mother's loss of her youth, of her childhood, when she was playful along with her two younger cousins, and the speaker's loss, the poet's loss of her mother. Okay, who would also laugh looking at that photograph, okay, which would remind her of that laughter which had accompanied at that time. But is it a loss in the real sense of the word is what the larger question is, because that is the title, and it is here that the title of the poem, a photograph, is important, because the photograph ensures that the past is still present in some form. It has been captured in some form so that it is part of the present. Understood? I hope I am not complicating it too much. जो बीत गया है वो अभी भी वर्तमान में किसी रूप में मौजूद है. The past is still part of the present in that form of the तस्वीर के रूप में वह अभी भी वर्तमान में मौजूद है. Because the photograph ensures that the past is still present in some form. At another level, the poem that was written several years ago itself serves the purpose of the photograph. Photograph से, तस्वीर से आपको जो बीत गया है समय उसकी याद दिलाता है. जो कविता है, the poem also takes us back to that past which is not present anymore. Okay, when you are reading this poem, you are also reminded of a past which is not present anymore. Okay, so the poem is operating actually at two different levels. Understood? Now the first line starts with the word cardboard, right? The cardboard. Cardboard itself suggests the idea of fragility. You know, जो कि एक तरह से परमानेंट नहीं है. नॉर्मली हम फोटो फ्रेम देखते हैं, मेटल फ्रेम रहता है ताकि वो हमेशा के लिए उस फोटोग्राफ को प्रोटेक्ट करके रखे. लेकिन कार्डबोर्ड इज नॉट समथिंग विच इज लाइक very strong. It can be torn apart, it can be destroyed. It's not like metal. So there's a sense of weakness, of a fragility which is associated with the cardboard. And it is this fragile cardboard that suggests that life is also equally fragile. So the cardboard has been used as a metaphor for life itself in this particular poem. Then the third is the death, which is as a theme. Life is a theme, time is a theme, death is also a theme. Because when the cousins were small, they held on to the 12-year-old older cousin for their safety. Each one holding one of my mother's hands for safety in the sea. Because younger children can get scared as the sea waves come rushing towards the seashore. So they were holding on to the 12-year-old elder cousin sister for their safety. But there was no one to hold on to for the mother when death came calling. When the mother's time was to bid farewell to this world, there was no one she could hold on to in order to live on in this world, in order to be safe from the clutches of death. So it kind of is a pointer to the inevitability of death. To the inevitability of death कि जब मौत आती है, so it is a sense of finality. Okay. The poem is also a pointer to aging, कि एक तरह से उम्र हो जाती है, you know, from a 12-year-old to a mother and then finally to her demise, to her death. Okay. And at that time she remains only a memory for her daughter. She has been reduced only to a memory for her daughter, and the daughter only remembers all those times associated with her mother. Then let's now come to the specific phrases that I said I'll explain in the critical appreciation. Terribly transient feat. Now transient means something which is not permanent. Okay. Nature is permanent while human life is not permanent. Nature as in associated in this particular case with the sea, with the beach is permanent, but human life obviously is not permanent. Then there is also a sense of fondness, also a sense of loss at the same time in the poem. How is that? Now for the mother, the photograph serves as a moment of fondness. For the mother, for a moment at the beach with her cousins. For the daughter, reminding herself of the moment when her mother would laugh looking at the photograph is another moment of feeling happy. Okay, so there is a sense of fondness associated for both the daughter as well as the mother. Okay, but for different reasons. Okay, looking at the same photograph. Right, but the present has neither. Both are in the past. You know, what this daughter is seeing is also in the past. What the mother saw is also in the past. Both of them are not in the present. Therefore, there is a sense of loss also which is conveyed at the same time through the same photograph. Through the same act of seeing the same photograph. Okay. Now, what are the poetic devices which have been used? Ek to stood still to smile. It's a thing of alliteration. Alliteration is when the same alphabet is used close to each other in order to convey a particular effect. Stood still to smile. The alphabet S has been used. It's a poetic device, alliteration for effect. Terribly transient feat. It's also alliteration, T and T. But more than alliteration, it's also what we call a poetic device called transferred epithet. Now, all this may not come in an examination for you, for CBSE students, but when you are understanding literature, especially class 11 students, it's always better to understand these different poetic devices, particularly if you are at the graduation level planning to take up subjects like English literature. So, it is basically a transferred epithet is a figure of speech in which an adjective qualifies a noun other than the thing that it is actually describing. In this case, terribly is not qualifying transient. It's actually qualifying feat. Okay, that's why it's called a transferred epithet. Okay, in other words, it means that the epithet is transferred from the noun it's meant to describe to another noun in this sentence. In this case, the terribly word is describing feat, not the word transient. Transient means something which is not permanent. Okay, apart from the fact that this is also an alliteration. Then we come to labored ease of loss. Now this is what we call an oxymoron. ये आपको मालूम होना चाहिए. Oxymoron is that when two opposite meaning words are used together. Okay. Labored का मतलब क्या होता है? Labored is something in which you have to work hard to make things happen. Ease का मतलब क्या है? जो आसानी से हो जाए. So how can you use labored and ease together? Which is why we are calling it an oxymoron. OXYMORON. What is labored or difficult obviously cannot be easy, which is why this has been used as an oxymoron. Okay, and it is to kind of convey the difficulty that this sense of loss creates. Then the last two lines, one ek to ye alliteration hai, silence, silences. Also silence has been personified. You know, normally silence is when there is complete chuppi, you know, when there is complete quiet. But here silence has been kind of almost, it's been given the humanification of silence. Okay, as though it is silence which is silencing you in this entire sense of loss which is felt by the daughter when she's looking at that photograph, just like it was for the mother earlier. Okay, now she has been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived, and of this circumstance there is nothing to say at all. It's silence, silences. There is a deep sense of loss and an accompanying sense of grief that the daughter feels looking at this particular photograph taken many years ago. So this is as far as a photograph, the poem by Shirely Toulson is concerned. Go through all the questions. We will be doing separate video lessons dealing with the important questions from each of the poems and stories in Hornbill in particular. But if you look at the photograph in this in this particular poem given at the back, you'll be able to kind of, and if you make the notes, it will just make it easier for you when you are revising it ahead of the examination. So I hope it's all very clear. If you have any doubts, write in the comment section and we can discuss any doubts that you may have in this particular poem, A Photograph by Shirely Toulson. Thank you very much for watching.